Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, hi, Smriti. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving out some time on a Saturday morning, if I can say so. Would request every one of you to be on camera, please. Can I see some more faces? Sujoy, Anita, Vivek, Pratik. Okay. Uh, Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining into this session. Today's the session we are planning to host Dr. Rajib Dasgupta. A brief introduction about him will be given by me, and a vote of thanks at the end will be given by my colleague Balaji. The session will be interactive. First, we'll hear Dr. Rajib, and then we later move on towards the end on the discussion side. A brief introduction about Dr. Rajib Dasgupta. Dr. Rajiv Das Gupta is a professor at Center of Social Medicine and Community Medicine, School of Social Science at JNU, New Delhi. Dr. Das Gupta is managing editor of Indian Journal of Public Health. He was also awarded with a Fulbright Senior Research Fellow in 2010 to 11, and he was also a visiting associate professor at in Global Disease Epidemiology and Control at Department of International Health, John Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Das has edited more than 13 volumes, 78 articles, 7 monographs, 12 scholarly publications, and was involved in near about 29 plus public health projects. He has also delivered 170 lectures and 50 plus peer-reviewed conferences, papers, and presentations. Earlier, Dr. Rajiv has also worked and devoted his time at Municipal Corporation of Delhi office as a deputy health officer. So for today's session, he'll be talking about a lot about editing, how to write, and different things. Over to you, Dr. Rajiv. The session is yours.
Anshika, thank you very much, and my thanks and gratitude to the FPHS for this invitation. Also, very nice to see a lot of fellows in this public health fellowship program. And thank you for taking this initiative. I'll be brief, maybe about 10 to 15 minutes of not really a presentation, essentially sharing what an editorial team looks at. In fact, the first point to make is that it's always an editorial team, a group of people who work on an article that's submitted rather than a person, and therefore through your article you're really communicating with the team, and therefore a team also is a diverse agglomeration of persons, each coming in with their own knowledge, with their own understanding of both what an article should be, and also also what they feel is necessary or good for the journal. So increasingly younger authors are submitting manuscripts, and which is an excellent thing. Also, there is a pressure to publish as early as possible to build up your career, which is all extremely important. And therefore, journals are facing a huge amount of submissions, and having to process a lot of submissions. Also, and on a slightly lighter note, anyone and anyone who deals with them, this is my joke, so don't take it too seriously. Anyone who thinks are dealing with more than one human being thinks it's public health, which it is not. Public health is a discipline with its own body of knowledge, with its own perspective, and just an agglomeration of study subjects doesn't really make it public health in that sense. And therefore, this is a bit of a conflict in a sense of understanding, particularly when those working with a relatively small amount of clinical data wish to or try to make a public health argument through that. It is not that a small amount of clinical data can't have a public health argument, but there needs to be framed through public health lens. And therefore, what I would like to communicate is very specifically, though generic in a sense, but I look at it through a public health lens, a lens of a public health journal. During 2012 to 2014, I was managing editor for the Indian Journal of Community Medicine. Last almost 2 years, I've been managing editor of Indian Journal of Public Health, and now elected editor for 23-25 term of the Indian Journal of Public Health. So it is a lot of work and a lot of responsibility. Each of us, and by each of us, I include me too, remember, in our lifetimes, we will be more rejected than accepted. Okay, that's the first thing we have to learn to accept. That majority of our submissions are going to get rejected, and therefore there's nothing, in a sense. Well, one feels bad, of course, but this is not to be taken personally, because this is a process that we go through. And Magic Johnson, the basket player, he puts it very eloquently. He puts it that this is in fact what I'm saying, I draw upon what Magic Johnson said or wrote, is that you can only rise to the top in sports, and even publication is nothing but a sport, really, in a sense. You can really rise to the top if you know how to accept your losses and then build upon it for the next match. And even for those at the very top of sports or any professional sporting, in their lifetimes, remember, they have lost far more matches than they have won. Even the legends statistically actually have lost far more matches than they have won, because they're winning. What we see, what we remember, is them winning maybe 10 tournaments, 20 tournaments, but it's a lot of matches that they have lost in their lifetime cumulatively. And that's equally true of us. Now, the point that Magic Johnson makes is that as sports persons, or as athletes, or as professional players, we are all professional losers. In other words, we must know how to lose, and then only you will be able to win. That's essentially what Magic Johnson argues. So therefore, the rejection is not really throwing out everything, but of course learning how not to get rejected. But even rejections or revisions are opportunities to make things stronger. The second point I think I would like to make, and please remember, I don't have a script. I'm just speaking from the heart. So there is no presentation. The second point to remember is that we often, I mean, all of us are extremely emotional or proud of the work that we have done, or as a part of a team where we have contributed. But I mean, sorry to put it bluntly, there is no other way of putting it, that a bad research or a weak research or a poor research cannot produce a good paper. So do not think that it's only the manuscript is getting rejected. In some senses, it's the whole research process. It's not that there are bad decisions, just like any football match or cricket match that we see. There are bad decisions, and here you don't have the sophistication of third umpires and or all kinds of television gadgetry that we see. This is an extremely human institution, and often when we get rejected, we actually do not have chance of an appeal. Which is this is not, then therefore this is not to say that there aren't errors or there are human decisions which are not really perfect, but by and large, manuscripts simply get rejected because, again, to put it bluntly, they're not worth getting accepted, because the research itself is not really up to the standard, and it is very competitive, as you know, as you can understand, it is indeed very competitive. So a poor research or a weak research can never translate into a magnificent manuscript. You need to be, you really need to be a very gifted author to be able to do that. And therefore, what really matters, or what really is the starting point, is the rigor that we put into research. And if that component is weak or wanting in quality, then one can't really produce a quality manuscript. Now, having said that, there are, I'll first tell you what we look at from this side of the table, and then I'll talk a bit about the other side of table as to those who are submitting the manuscripts, and particularly this group as a group which is training to be researchers and authors, and I wish all of you are very successful. But again, the bottom line is you will get more rejected than accepted. Anyway, doesn't really mean that we don't work hard or we don't do quality work. Now, essentially, when a manuscript gets accepted or gets viewed favorably, there are a set of criteria that we look at. First is the importance of the problem, and essentially, because there's a public health group, everything that I say is to be understood or interpreted through a public health lens. So first is the importance and the timeliness of what you are submitting to a journal, and therefore the relevance and the prevalence of the problem. Now, prevalence doesn't really mean it will have to be very large numbers. Many of you know that in recent times, for example, rare diseases have started getting a lot more focus. Rare diseases are increasingly getting a lot more funding. But that doesn't mean that, therefore, rare diseases being small in numbers as far as prevalence goes is therefore unimportant. So it's really a combination of relevance and prevalence that's looked at in engaging whether the manuscript is addressing an important public health problem. And equally ranked parameter is the quality of the writing style. Now, there are no two words that the manuscript has to be well written, irrespective of how important the first part is, that you're dealing really with a burning problem and so on. And what really is a well-written article is that it's seen from the perspective of the reader. Please remember that a well-written article is not necessarily what's interpreted as well-written by the editorial team or the reviewers, but reviewers and editorial team is constantly looking at whether this is making sense to the reader. and therefore for the reader it has to be, and this is equally true for us when we enjoy reading any article, and particularly newspapers, and that's the skill journalists have the best, of writing clearly, of writing something that's straightforward, that's easy to follow, and that logically builds up. And therefore, if you want to be a good author, a successful author, it's not just reading a whole lot of scientific journals or public health journals, but also read good, what we would call lay media, but really good quality lay media. I mean, endless material today being available online. The next most important thing, of course, is the design. Now, just like any movie, ultimately it's the script that wins it, or the plot that wins a movie. It is really the study design, and the centrality of the content is really in the design, and therefore that's what I said at the beginning, that if that rigor is missing from research, then don't expect that it will magically transform into a very good manuscript. And the design has to be both rigorous and comprehensive. Ultimately, you are writing a piece which is, give and take, anything between 2,500 to 3,500 words, roughly, for most journals, for most categories, particularly if it's original research. And therefore, the design not just has to be rigorous, it can't be a lot of things. If there's a big research, if there's a say a multi-country collaboration or a multi-centric collaboration, there's a whole lot of data, then all of it can't be packed into one manuscript just because you want to make a big point or a big splash. If it is that, then break it down into components which actually presents to the reader more comprehensively. Also, and that I'll talk about when we get to writing, is how good the literature review is, and how the literature review really draws into the problematization. And finally, again, I am telling you from the editorial point of view, what we look at is finally, I mean, linked to this is whether there is a sufficiently large sample. This doesn't mean that a student thesis or an MD thesis or a PhD thesis won't make to a journal because it's not a sufficiently large sample. That is always recognized that this is a student work, this is a thesis work. At the same time, a sufficiently large sample always doesn't mean funded research, 10 states, 15 states, no, not necessarily. But it can't be too small, which doesn't really help make a public health argument cogently. So essentially, these are some of the reasons on which a manuscript gets accepted, and therefore, more or less, it's the obverse of these things for which a manuscript gets rejected. And one of the important reasons, in fact, one of the most overwhelming reasons, is actually statistics. If you're doing an inappropriate test, if it's a statistical exercise that's done insufficiently, or on the other hand, if you are over-interpreting the results, both are problematic. And of course, linked to this whole design is smaller biased samples. Remember, when we have to choose between it's often a design versus an inadequate design, adequacy, inadequacy of a design versus well or poorly written. It is always a good design that will get preference. So if you really have a good design, and rigorous and good results, you won't by and large lose out because it's relatively poorly written. That's what that can be. And in fact, remember, no journal wants to lose a good paper. And a good paper is not just how good the language is, but how good the research content is. And therefore, if the research content is good, the journal team will work with you, make you do endless revisions, probably, to the point that you will probably get angry or frustrated, but improve the quality of the writing. But if the design is poor, there's nothing that the editorial team can do to improve the design. That's simply not possible. That's a design, and data is done and dusted. That just simply forecloses that possibility. And therefore, I think one of the important lessons I would want you to take back is what is really called, what's really termed, begin with the end in mind. Often the writing part comes after the whole team is sick and tired of that research process or project or your thesis or whatever. But the planning for that writing should actually begin when you are beginning the research process. It's not that something comes at the end because it's sort of one of the essential boxes you have to tick that you have published. No, that never produces a good research to start with, and it will certainly not produce a good paper at the end of it. So keep this end in mind at the beginning, and if this end is not kept in mind at the beginning, then generally I'm saying one doesn't really are able to produce a very good paper or manuscript. Having said that, how really is a paper or a manuscript crafted well? Now, again, make a distinction between these two. We focus as researchers or as very excited researchers, or whether it's your own thesis or it's a funded research, we are focused almost exclusively on that whole scientific process, and relatively neglecting the writing process. Now, we feel that just because the research is good, and most research is good, no doubt about that, but the writing process is another a slightly different ball game from the research process. And many, and I'm saying this particularly for students or younger researchers, a lot of heart and energy and really hard work, both individually or as part of a team, they put into the research process, but the writing part is then left to one or two in the team, or if you're an individual student or a researcher, mostly a student. Nobody is hardly an individual researcher in a funded research world. That's teams. Otherwise, if you're an individual author, it's generally a thesis. But even if it's a collaborative research project, the writing is simply left to one or two people, or you yourself, when you are completely drained and tired at the end of a thesis writing or a MD or a PhD course or a program. So the writing process, now the reason I'm saying is that the writing, and that we can figure out when it comes to us, is that it is good work, but why is it so poorly written? Is because the same rigor or energy that we put into the research, we do not put into the writing, because writing is a very difficult task. It just can't be done literally overnight. Also, uh, also many young researchers or young students find this scientific writing or a journal writing, many find it overwhelming. Now, do not think those who are published are any better than you. They are all our brothers and sisters who are getting published. It's a lot of how much rigor and how much energy and how much sense we put into this writing process, because the writing is essentially communicating your research and creating new and a complex content. Now the whole emphasis is on sort of internalizing that as an author or as a lead author, I really have to produce a new complex content, for which I'm partly drawing upon my original research, but I'm also drawing upon literature review and this whole part. When I get into section by section, I'll just explain what I'm meaning. That when you are writing a manuscript, what you really know when you sit down to write a manuscript is your methodology and results. The rest of the things, which is introduction, how you pack the literature review into, say, 600, 800 words, how you write the discussion, conclusion, that's really creating new content. And that's not, there's nothing that exists in your research work which you can just, take off the shelf. Therefore, writing requires not just a different set of skills, but also a different set of energy, over and above the energy put into the research process or the energy put into the thesis. And therefore, writing has to be seen as a sort of an independent exercise. Obviously not absolutely independent, but it is something different and something extra to the research work or the thesis work that each of us have done, because it's creating new complex content. And therefore, I'll just show you just two slides as to how this process looks or should be. And so first I'll show you one graphic rather, how it should be, and a second graphic, which is really a table, which is a sort of a checklist, and then I'll close. I hope I can share this the slide.
Yes.
It should be enabled.
Yes.
Okay. Can you see it? Anshika, can you see it?
Yes, we can see.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Now, essentially, when we write an article, essentially it has to be seen in this hourglass imagery. Now, I'm not getting into what is introduction, what is Mitchell's methods. All of you know that. All of you are trained researchers or in the process of training. So I'm not repeating what you know. Now, essentially, how an article should be using these, or not using, rather how you would adapt these into a manuscript and an article, is as follows. You start with a very broad opening. Okay, there are endless articles when you search in the internet on how to write a good article. There are simply endless ones, and some of them are excellent, far better than what I can communicate in 10 or 15 minutes. And you should certainly read those. But essentially, what it should do is to start with a very broad opening, and then funnel into the knowledge gap. And that's what introduction, literature review, conceptualization, and finally, what is your research question, or what is your research hypothesis? That's where you have to funnel down. And most readers would actually do a make or break decision here when you start reading an article, if you are not attracted here as a reader, you are not going to get into these. If as a reader, an article or an author is not able to present to me something that's an interesting and an important problem, I'm not going to waste my time. All of you are as busy as I am. Nobody is more busy or less busy than the other, and therefore, this is really the place to attract the reader, and this is where and remember, the editorial team is also your reader to start with, and this is where you are winning or losing the game. Most of us are actually focused here because this is where the heart of the researcher lies, and this is where most of our blood, sweat, and pride is. But the blood, sweat, and pride is of the research is not going to win you this prize. That's the point or distinction I'm making, and that's the game. That's the game we should be aware of as an author or as a prospective author. And therefore start with a very broad landscape, what the problem is, whether it's, start at a global scale or a national scale, and then quickly funnel down. And this is a skill of how quickly you're able to funnel down into your research problem, because your research problem may be very dear to your heart. It may be very necessary according to your supervisor, but the readership is very, very broad of any journal. This is not a a college magazine or a wall magazine where everybody's going to come and stand and read. No, it is a very competitive process and a competitive world, and therefore how quickly you are able to zero in is really going to win or lose. Remember, the editorial team is constantly making subjective decisions. This part is objective. This part is objectively looked. Obviously, this part is objectively looked, how good or rigorous or appropriate or inappropriate your statistics is, or if it's a qualitative study, how well you have illustrated your results, how well you have unraveled the phenomena. All that is true as far as materials and methods go, but this is where you are winning or losing the perceptions game, and this is the perceptions game to win first. This is something, remember, materials, methods, results, etc. have gone through a whole lot of rigorous checks and balances, whether it's your research advisory committee, whether it's your ethics review board, whether it's your pre-submission presentations, and largely talking of student work, or in a research project, or in a funded research project, you would have a technical advisory group, blah, blah, all kinds of checks and balances, these go through. Therefore, anyone who is reaching a journal submission stage, unless it's a really, really poorly done student thesis, and there are good theses and bad theses, let us accept, unless it's a very poorly done research work or very, very shoddy process, background process, this part is never a problem. This part is never a problem as far as winning the perceptions game is concerned. But it's really this part that wins or loses the perception game. And again, the second part where you win or lose is discussion, conclusions, and implications. Again, this is something which doesn't go through the rigorous checks and balances of this block. The results, and make a distinction, this is sometimes many authors, particularly the beginners, make a mistake. Results really should objectively state findings. It should simply state findings. If it's a quantitative study, it should state your lab results or biological results or population-based data results. But results are results. Results section is not really about interpretation. Results section will describe results largely in an active voice and not use passive voice here. It is the discussion section where you are interpreting your results and then linking them to both the literature review as well as the knowledge gap here. That task is of the discussion section. Many a times what some authors do is bring in interpretation here, and then discussion simply becomes a repetition of this, or this tends to go a bit astray. It is really results where you should limit to the objective findings, and in the discussion interpret the results, and finally in the conclusions and implications. Again, you will see that it is from a narrow playfield. It's again widening out to where we have started, and therefore you will have to, like any movie that you see, there's a final resolution at the end. Each article should also end in a resolution. The reader should be able to read it as a thriller, and therefore at the end of it, he or she should find some resolution. Please remember that the reader is under no obligation to read your thesis. Sorry, that's not his job. That's the examiner's job. That's your supervisor's job. You can't hold a reader on gunpoint that he should read your thesis. Sorry, no. Therefore, there has to be a resolution where it connects back to the larger problem from where your research process or your research thinking started. Anyway, and the last point, before you, and this is particularly true for individual authors, particularly students, basing this on student thesis, basing your manuscript on student thesis. In a collaborative project, generally there is a group work that goes into the writing process. But even if it goes into a writing, a group work goes into a writing process, remember, is the same group who has been involved in this research, and therefore, in some senses, all of us own this, and all of us are not adequately critical of what we have written, and therefore, before you submit it to a journal, you should share it with a friend or a peer reader who is actually not part of this process, and run this checklist with him or her, your peer reader, who should be your critic. And just I'll share this with you. He or she should actually run through these questions, and if the answers are this, somewhat aligned to this, then the article is not really meeting the quality criteria. And the role of the peer reader, your friend, who should be your worst critic at that point, is really very, very crucial. If you can't convince your friend, you can't convince the editorial team, or finally the journal reader. Your friend is your friend. And if he or she is not able to follow this, or if his or her answers or perceptions are something that this writer and column is suggesting, then please recognize you have a problem. And therefore these 10 questions are really very, very important before you submit. I'll stop here, and I hope there are questions, and I'm happy to answer the questions as best as I can. Thank you. I actually ended up speaking a bit more than I thought. Over to you, please.
It's okay, it's fine. The session, your conversation was insightful. My colleague Balaji has some questions which he got from external people, so would request him to take it over.
Yes, please.
Before that, I would like, if any of our participants who are there in the session, if they have any question, you can either unmute yourself and say, yeah, Anita Bhargava has a question. Yes, Anita, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, sir. It's really nice, first of all, to see him after such a long time. I was a student in CSRD